Welcome to the Wanderers History Podcast and to the bit late follow-up of my Oppenheimer preview. Right off the bat, I have to say this is one of my favorite movies of the year and easily one of Christopher Nolan's best movies. But more importantly, I think this movie proves a few valuable points. First of all, according to reports, this movie cost somewhere between 90 and 100 million US dollars to make, not counting promotional activities. Given the cinematic landscape that we're in at the moment, where you see all these ridiculously expensive franchises which can span for less than half of a decade and cost up to billions, the cost of Oppenheimer is quite remarkable, also given the fact that it is well known how Christopher Nolan is not that much of a fan of CGI. According to Box Office Mojo, as of late August, it made close to 780 million US dollars worldwide. And that was by far one of the best reviewed movies of the year. Now, for a 3-hour-long biopic heavily focused on the first half of the 20th century, a multi-layered political story and scientific story as well, showing not just the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer, but also the creation of the atom bomb, the political angles pre- and post-World War II, going into the Cold War, and all the entanglements from there. This is truly a good sign for filmmakers. As long as the premise is interesting, the writing is good, and the acting is solid, which in here, I think almost every single role, even to the shortest cameos, are flawlessly played, then the audiences will easily go for a 3-hour-long movie, biopic, whatever you want to call it, enjoy it, and spread word around it about how good such a movie is. The cinematography is fantastic, shot in IMAX, where even the IMAX creators admitted that Nolan's movie stretched their ability as much as physically possible for this movie, and it shows it. It's an interesting bit of trivia that the IMAX movie itself is 11 miles long in film. Now, from the breathtaking landscapes of New Mexico to the beautiful shots in Europe, mainly in Germany, this movie is a very engaging, absorbing cinematic experience. And the soundtrack completes it very well. It also conveys, at times, the almost unbearable tension which this movie emanates as the hearing progresses. And Ludwig Göransson did a great job. And a song of the original soundtrack which struck me, it was long ingrained into my mind, was the very haunting piece called Can You Hear the Music? Going to the casting, flawless, from the protagonist and how Cillian Murphy captures not just the casting is great from the protagonist and how Cillian Murphy embodies the spirit of Oppenheimer, but also his voice, the cadence, everything to do with it, to Robert Downey Jr.'s masterful performance of Louis Strauss, someone that I admit I did not know much, if anything, about prior to seeing this movie, to a very powerful performance of a flawed individual character, which was Oppenheimer's wife. So Emily Blunt is just phenomenal there. And Matt Damon is basically, in his portrayal of Lieutenant General Leslie Groves, an embodiment of the US military of that era. Every performance in this movie, I think it's at least a 9 out of 10. There's even like Gary Oldman's very short cameo, and I think it's not really a spoiler. He plays President Truman, and in the very limited time that we see him on screen, it's very revealing. And of course, Gary Oldman is one of the most versatile actors of the last few decades, and it was quite a pleasant surprise to see his take on a very interesting US presidential historical figure. Now, the story is where some folks might have some issues with. Worth bearing in mind that this is, after all, a Christopher Nolan movie, and in typical fashion, it can be a bit difficult to remember all the plot threads, all the names even. This is a movie which shows the journey of not just Oppenheimer, but the journey of modern physics, which involved so many notable scientists of more than one era, actually. So from Einstein and Niels Bohr and Heisenberg to Richard Feynman, Ernest Lawrence, David Lawrence Hill, Edward Teller, the creator of the hydrogen bomb, and just the plethora of physicists who worked on the Manhattan Project and Los Alamos. There's so much to assimilate, and I will admit that I have to go and watch this movie not once but twice because there will be some initial points that you might miss out on. Based on the book American Prometheus, this movie gives me hope that there is hope for grand history biopics and stories that have not really been shown before, and not at least to this level, to shine and flourish in the future. Does this movie have some flaws? Some might argue yes. Some have said that it may be a bit too long, too many meandering stories, filled with the occasional mistakes. One being, there's one notable scene when Oppenheimer gives the speech in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where we can see a wrong American flag with, the official recognitions of some US states after 1945. Also, some have argued that they did not go more visual to show the horrors caused by the nuclear bombs. It's an interesting way of showing the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You see the political angle. You see, basically, there's a great scene of the Secretary of State where they have the short list of which Japanese cities to bomb, and there's one very almost ludicrous point that, they didn't want to bomb Kyoto because it has a great cultural significance to the Japanese, but also because one of the top officials went on their honeymoon there. So there's kind of like this element of very casual soullessness almost in deciding which people died, which people did not. But what this movie does as well, very well, is showing the haunting effects that this whole project had on not just Oppenheimer, but a lot of the scientific community of the United States, and how this ushered a new era of, starting with the Cold War, but also nuclear armament between the major powers of the world. It is worth bearing in mind that the genesis point of that is the creation of the atom bomb, to what was at the time believed to be a justified reason to end the war. But with this, we know it's a very contentious point of view. So it's worth pointing out that I agree that at least a few flashbacks could have been shown, and instead they decided to do something with a very short sequence where a bright light just flashes and you can see basically the effects that a nuclear bomb would have on humans, but it's not in Japan, it's in actually the hall where the speech that I've just mentioned took place. Worth mentioning that this movie is rated R. However, despite all of this, I think the benefits definitely outweigh any reasonable criticisms of this movie. Hopefully, this will make studio heads to look at the success of this project and greenlight other such projects, and time will tell. But I was a big fan of this movie and can't wait to get the Blu-ray release once the theatrical running period runs out, and that is still a few months away. Worth mentioning that it had, I think, 100-day theatrical release, which is almost unheard of these days. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. It really does help the channel a lot. And until the next time, all the best. I shall return with some news over the next weeks about the future series. I just wanted to give my ideas and opinions on what I think is one of the best movies of this year.